How's your mindset? How are you moving? And how's your motivation? I'm asking you three questions that deal with the first letter M on a magnificent Monday for a very special reason. And that reason is today I'm speaking with Richard Connor, the host of the Inspire to Run podcast, about how these three things manifest in the life of his pursuit as a runner. So, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but I want to tell you that you don't have to be a runner in order to really vibe with what Richard is laying down in this episode. My name's Coach Jay. I am your host for this Pep Talk podcast, and thank you for tuning in to episode number 7. That's right, episode 7 of season 2. And you know how we like to start. Have you had your dose of pep today? No? Don't worry. I've got you. Let's go. It is a blessing, an honor, a privilege that you all are rocking with us to start your week off. And we're going to do our best to keep bringing you the pep and the motivation, because y'all know the mission of the podcast is to cheer you on and to coach you up. Everybody needs a cheerleader, but everybody also needs a coach to help us elevate to that next level in life. And I believe that the conversation today is going to do just that. And before we get there, I want to continue thanking you all for just your support, your emails, your comments. Thank you for subscribing and for sharing. And if you haven't yet, go ahead and just stop what you're doing, right? And go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that rating and review button, because your efforts on that end help this podcast continue to be shared and put in front of the eyes of others who may need the type of content that we are producing on a regular basis. Also, this is day 8 of our 30-day affirmation challenge. If you missed that in episode 6 of the podcast, last week's episode, I can't encourage you enough to jump in on that and to see what it's all about, because I promise you that it's worth it. Our affirmation for this second 5-day period is simple. I use my words to create my present and my future. Let that sink in. What type of present and future are you trying to create, and how are you using your words to help you get there? All right, I'm not going to dig too deep into it because I really want to get to this interview. So the next voices that you hear are going to be mine and Richard as we dig deep into the topics of mindset, motivation, and movement. I'll be back after. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Pep Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay, and remember, y'all, this is your beginning the week one-on-one coaching session where we cheer you on and we coach you up. And I am very blessed right now to have a guest on the podcast that I've had a chance to get to know. We've been trying to schedule this conversation probably since the summer, and the stars have aligned and the schedules have aligned, and we're finally able to do it. So I'd like to introduce you all, Pep Squad, to Mr. Richard Connor, the host of the Inspire to Run podcast, which is one that you really should check out, even if you're not a runner like me. But Richard, we're so glad to have you. Why don't you greet the Pep Squad and tell us who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Hi, everyone. So, Richard Connor. Really happy to be here on the show and share a little bit about my story. I would say personally, born and raised in Connecticut. Parents are from the Caribbean. Mom's from Jamaica, dad's from Dominican Republic. And I'm still living in Connecticut here with my family. And professionally, I worked in marketing for many years, almost 20 years. And yeah, that's just, a little bit about me. And then, as you mentioned, I have a podcast, a running podcast. And as you can imagine, I'm a runner. So started running in high school and then took a bunch of years off and then got back into it a few years ago. And my whole journey is kind of centered around that. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about me.
Very cool. Richard, we're glad to have you. And something about your intro kind of stuck me. So you have two parents who are from tropical weather, but you are subjecting yourself to absolute cold during the winter. How?
Yeah. Well, first off, said parents are still living in Connecticut. and subjecting themselves to the cold. But it's a mystery for me as well. My dad came in through New York with my grandmother. My mom came in through Texas after nursing school overseas, and somehow they met, and this is where they decided to raise a family. So I don't get it. And my wife's from Peru, which you have pretty mild temperatures there. So none of it really makes any sense. But we're here now. We're going to make the best of it.
That is that's so funny. That is just incredibly funny. Okay, all right. So your podcast is centered around three pillars that I strongly believe in: mindset, movement, and motivation. I hope I got those in the correct order. Okay. So, can you talk to us about how those have played out in your own life?
Yeah, well, first I kind of developed the framework through dozens and dozens of interviews with others, kind of hearing their stories. And kind of as a marketer and then engineer by training, I started to develop this framework in my mind as far as like how their stories went. And it has seemed to kind of flow in that way, right? That mindset, movement, and motivation. So, my own story, how it fits in there, really starts in the mindset part. And it goes back to my childhood. And honestly, I didn't really think about this or reflect on it until my adult life. I kind of grew up not very, I would say, strong, like, sports wasn't really my thing. I didn't feel like I was good at that stuff. And I just remember usually saying, I can't, whether it was physical related or otherwise.
Hmm.
And that carried on into my adult life until I would say the one thing that I felt like I could do was run. And don't ask me how I joined the cross country team in high school because that's going back too far and I don't remember how it happened. But I remember I felt like I belonged somewhere, right? I belonged there. I belonged to the team. And I wasn't the fastest person on the team, but I made a good contribution and I enjoyed what I was doing.
Okay.
So, that took me from kind of high school maybe to just a few years ago, which is, decades later. I won't give away any numbers, where family, career, everything else kind of got in the way. And I got back into fitness and running through Spartan obstacle course races. And I was at a moment in my life where I'm like, you know what? This scares me. I'm afraid of heights. I didn't think I could do anything that's like overhead, like climbing a rope or doing monkey bars and a bunch of other things. So I'm like, I wanted to take this opportunity to overcome fears and do things that I had never done before.
Hmm.
And for me, that was the mindset pillar, was actually believing that I could or having that strong desire to do those things that I never did before.
Okay.
So that's mindset. And then the movement was taking action, was training for the better part of a year, fixing an old shoulder injury, doing the training for the race, and then actually doing the race and realizing, hey, I really enjoyed this, even though it was hard and I probably wanted to quit 20 times, but I finished it and I know I can do better and I'm going to do better. And then the motivation is, how do you keep going? How do you stay consistent? Because, you're really going to see the results that you want or get to where you want to be if you continue down that path and you don't quit. But you're not going to be motivated every day. You're not going to
Hmm.
get out of bed and say, oh, I'm excited to run 15 miles today when it's cold outside and, whatever the case is. So, how do you maintain that motivation to stay consistent and reach your goals? So, for me, that was hiring a coach, that was sharing my story
Hmm.
with other people. It was doing things and seeing the results of those. I didn't always get a PR, or I didn't always get to where I wanted to be, but it was always motivation for me to do the next thing, for me to
Yeah.
learn and figure out what to do next. So that's a little bit about my story in those three pillars, but I also see how other stories kind of fit somewhat in that framework.
Okay. Okay, so I like that. So you did cross country in high school, which in my opinion is an extreme sport. Um it is. I've seen enough races. I Anyway, and you took a break and you came back around to it, running the Spartan course for your first time. How well do you remember that race, like sitting here now?
Oh, I remember it very well. I remember what I had for breakfast. I remember I had to drive through the mountains to get to the actual course. I remember it was the most beautiful day you could ever ask for, especially for a race. I remember I almost cried on one of the obstacles because I got stuck and I couldn't get over the obstacle and I couldn't get back down. So I remember quite a bit.
Okay. Okay. Stop right there.
Yeah.
Tell us about, because that's where I was going. I wanted to know if you can remember maybe what the hardest part of the race was, or the first moment where you really begun to question, I can't do this, and how you got over it. So can you tell us about that, please?
100%. So the race in general, we don't back then you didn't know how long the races were. So the Spartan sprint was supposed to be around 3 miles, right? It's supposed to be around a 5K. So I went out, we did the first half mile or so. I did the first two or three obstacles, no problem. We were just going over walls, nothing
Hmm.
too extreme. And then I got to the first obstacle, which I don't really remember what it was, but I remember I failed it. So this was obstacle 3 or 4. And the penalty for failing an obstacle back then was burpees. So the only way you could continue was you had to do 30 burpees.
Ooh.
And I remember that I did my 30 burpees and I lost my will to live. I'm thinking, I am so worn out just from doing 30 burpees. I know I had another 3 miles to go or so. I don't know. I know there's probably 3 or 4 other obstacles that I probably wasn't going to do successfully. So I had to do burpees there. And then I had to do, everything else as part of the race. So at that moment in time, absolutely wanted to quit the race. And that was probably the first part of the race that I was just like, I don't really know if I could do this. How am I going to get through the rest of it?
So what kept you going? Like, what was the 30 burpees and you still have to keep going? And you're looking ahead, you're like, oh, I'm probably gonna have to do more burpees and keep going on down the race. What kept you from going? And I don't know much about Spartan races, but can't you just like walk off the course and just go back to your car?
You absolutely can. And the interesting thing about it, which I didn't really know back then, is they have different levels. So you could run open heat, which I did back then. And for open heat, they're not really strict about the rules. Do you
Okay.
really need to do your burpees or the penalty laps and all that stuff? Or obstacles, like if for whatever reason you're unable to do the obstacle, you could probably just pass it, right? You could probably just skip it.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think there was that as strict, but for age group and then elite, then they are strict. Like you shall do everything. So anyway, so I did open heat, but aside from that, I guess two things kept me going. One thing about me that I think people who know me best know that I generally don't quit, almost to a fault. I will keep going and I will do something until I reach the end of said thing. Success or failure, I'm going to get to the end of it. And that's just, the tenacity inside of me. And then second is I was running with someone and, it's, family member, we trained together during the year. We committed to doing this. I committed, to being on his team and running this. And, I had to uphold
Okay.
that commitment. So I think it was an internal and external factor. One is if I say I'm going to do something, there is a very good chance that I'm going to do it. But
Okay.
also I kind of made that commitment to join the team and do that race.
Okay. So you were in community with another person, and you had that accountability piece to keep you going, plus your own just natural disposition that you're not going to quit. um I cannot promise that I would have kept going regardless of if I was with, I just would have been panting with exhaustion. Just keep going, like for both of us, just keep just keep going. So I think that's really, really impressive, uh that you were able to hold yourself to such a high account in a moment where you probably felt like you just didn't have anything left. And so what was the feeling like when you finally crossed the finish line?
First, thank goodness that's over. But second was I could do this better. Like there were moments in time where I was embarrassed of the way I felt and the way I performed. I was like, I know I can do better. I should be able to do better,
Hmm.
but I need help in doing so. So the first thing was like I just need to figure out how to train differently and just get better prepared for the next race because I want to do this again.
All right. So man, your first thought was not, woo, I'm glad to be done. Well, it was, but your overwhelming thought was, I can do this better. Richard, some people would say that you're a maniac. some some people would call you a maniac, man.
Rightfully
Um,
so.
but I love that because it's been my personal experience that when I do something that is really, really hard, I'm glad to be done with it. But my first thought is not always, I know that I can do that better. And when I talk to clients about this, um, I'm trying to get them to that point. I know that there are going to be people who are listening to this episode who understand that, yeah, I'm glad that it's done, but I can do it better. And I think that that is the thought that we can oftentimes resist, and we can act like we don't hear it, even though there's something on the inside of us that's telling us, yo, you need to do this again because you can do it better. And so you listen to that. And so you went on and you hired a Spartan coach. So what was that process like?
Um, it was actually quite frustrating because where I live, there aren't a lot of Spartan coaches. So the ones that I found were either like far away from me or it just didn't work out. And then my wife came home one day. She came home from the gym and she's like, "Hey, I think my trainer at the gym, which is 5 minutes away from us, I think he's a Spartan coach." And I'm like, "No, he's not. There's only a couple in the state. I know who they are. You don't know what you're talking about. Why are you bothering me with this?" She's like, "No, really. You need to talk to this guy." And I'm like, "Whatever." So I meet the guy. He literally has like a Spartan tattoo on his calf, on his leg. And it just turned out that the reason why he wasn't listed on the website is because they never changed his address when he moved to Connecticut.
Mm,
So my Spartan coach that I eventually signed on with was a trainer at the gym 5 minutes away from my house. And I wouldn't have known that unless, my wife didn't have him as a trainer and didn't know that. So that's how that went. So it turned out to be a frustrating experience to one of the best decisions I made in my life because now he's helped me do so much that I've never been able to do or thought I couldn't do. And we've become really good friends in the process. And it's just been an incredible relationship.
I think that's awesome. I I have this belief, and you know this about me. I have this belief that when we attune our minds to a goal, I believe that our minds have the ability to go out and help us to recognize the opportunities and the patterns and stuff that are around us. So you had this goal for yourself, you expressed it to your wife, and it just so happened that your wife's trainer is an unlisted Spartan coach. Like, what are the odds?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. And so you get this coach, and this coach helped you, to train and get ready for your next race. Uh, had you thought about getting coaching prior to your first race, or were you just like, I just want to try this and see if I could do it and get it done?
No, I mean, so a couple of things. One is I didn't have the best experience with coaches, previously, or specifically speaking about personal trainers,
Hmm.
like over the past few years. So I'd never really had the best experience. Um, and again, I didn't know anything really about Spartan. Like I didn't know I probably didn't even know at the time that there were Spartan coaches, right? So so I followed Spartan, came out with some training plans online, and other folks probably shared some things. So I'm like, all right, I'll do some lifting, I'll do some running, I'll fix my shoulder. I had to go to PT for I don't know 3 months, fix my shoulder, and I did some other training. I'm like, I'm as ready as I'm probably ever going to be to do this race. So at the time, it was me and my buddy, and we're working out, we're training, and we're like, we're just going to do this thing. But it wasn't until I actually did the race that I realized nothing I knew how to do or train for could
Hmm.
actually prepare me for that race. And that's why I needed help because I needed someone to show me what to do.
I think that's awesome. I know that there are a lot of people out there uh, who look at coaching through negative lenses, and they say that they'll never go back to one. But I'm glad that you were in a position and you found one that eventually became a friend, because I believe that coaching is important. I had a coach to get where I am now, and I believe, I think everybody needs coaching or a therapist or both, uh, because that's what life is. So, mindset, movement, and motivation. The movement piece. We talked about your mindset. The movement piece for you, it's not just about the physical activity, is it? Can you talk to us some more about that?
Yeah, so a lot of what we talk about is around the running, around physical active running, right?
Hmm.
So your couch to 5K or your first marathon or your ultra, and then everything that goes along with it: nutrition, hydration, gear, and all of that stuff. But some folks will say, "Well, I'm not a runner, but I cycle, or I swim, or I do other things," and I'm like, "That's great." Because all I want to do is within this framework is help you get to where you want to be. I
Hmm.
talk about running because that's what I do and love, and I've seen running change and transform, the lives of many people, some of which have been on the show, right? On my
Hmm.
show. But you could do, if your form of movement is different, then that's great. But then even beyond the physical part of it is I'm looking for folks to help them unblock whatever is blocking them from reaching their goals. So
Yeah.
that movement doesn't have to be the physical part. It could be, within their careers. It could be within their relationships. It could be in their business, right? If they're an entrepreneur, and reach those goals. And I feel like all of those things could be encapsulated kind of within that movement pillar, right? It's taking action to get to where you want to be. So yeah.
And so when you meet people who maybe have dabbled with running, but maybe they say it didn't take root, or I'm sure you encounter people who are just stuck in life, period, and just haven't had any movement in a long time. Uh, what do you say to that person, maybe to help them get unstuck with the running or to get unstuck with life, period?
Yeah, it's very individual, right? So I have to understand what were the circumstances that they kind of went through to get to them to the point that they were. So if they did running before and they didn't like it, well, why didn't you like it, right? Did
Hmm.
something hurt? Did you were out of breath? It was boring. Um, there's so many reasons why. Someone may say, well, I don't like running, and then once you know that, you can start to talk about like, well, what are your goals? And is running really the right thing for you? Is running going to help you reach your goals? And I think,
Hmm.
for health reasons, why I think it's a good option, right? So but also help you make you mentally stronger. And then how do you address some of those challenges that they had in the past? Oh, running is boring. Okay. Do you run with music or podcasts? Do you run with friends? Do you run on trails to make it interesting versus a treadmill? Like,
Hmm.
what are the things you could do to make it interesting to kind of unblock some of the challenges you had in the past? And if it's physical related, that's it probably goes a little bit beyond what I could do and say, because it probably is more of a conversation with them and their doctor. But
Right.
maybe it's walking, right? Maybe it's not running right away. Maybe it's getting into the habit of walking, because honestly, a lot of this is going to be about habit. And if you
It
get into
is.
the habit of walking 15, 20 minutes a day, almost every day a week, and it adds up to weeks and months, you're already ahead of yourself. And then you're going to be able to get to that next step of running. Maybe then you're ready for that couch to 5K. So it really depends on what experience you had before and what are the things that can help you have a better experience going forward. And that's really kind of the way I try to approach it. So I do that, with the show, I do that through runner stories, right? So
Right.
every runner has their story. And my hope is that someone listening identifies with one of those stories and say, you know what? I'm going to give it another try. I'm going to give it a go because this is my goal. I think running can help me get there. And this person inspired me through their story.
Okay. And I can say that you you're kind of convincing me to possibly give running another shot, because I'm that person. I'm that person who's always said that I get bored. Uh, I get bored running, even if I have music in my ears or a podcast. But I'm thinking it's been years since I've actually tried, so maybe I might give it another shot. So good job, Coach Richard.
All
Um,
right.
all right. So you talked about having fear also in your first run. Um, but you were able to overcome those fears. How were you able to do that?
Yeah. Um, a couple things to clarify. I don't know if I fully overcome all of those fears because
Right.
even after a number of those races, so one of my main fears, from a physical standpoint, is a fear of heights. So even in my last race, I'm crawling to the top of the structure and I'm looking down and my hands are still shaking and my legs are shaking and I'm thinking, take it one step at a time, and I'm literally talking myself through it to get
Mm,
myself over that obstacle. So that even happens to today. But what's different is I'm up and over that obstacle way faster today than I was 5 years ago when I first started. Or I know when I start at the bottom, I know I'm going to be able to get to the top and I'm going to be able to get back over. So, that's what's different. But, some of the things that have helped me is number one, the way I talk to myself.
good.
So I'm really focused on talking to myself on what I need to do and having I guess kind of pushing those fears aside, like you've done this before or you know what to do, it's a matter of doing it, keep it moving, and you'll get to the other side of this successfully. So I do that. It's also kind of the confidence, and some of these cases I've done it before, and some cases some obstacles I've never done before, but maybe I've done things that are similar,
Hmm.
or I've done like really hard things that's given me confidence that I could do other hard things. So so it's really just been training the way I talk to myself and then actually doing it to give me confidence that I can actually do, those obstacles and overcome those fears.
Cool. It sounds like repetition, building the habit, has had a lot to do with it. I can't remember where I heard this. It might have been Mel Robbins. I'm not sure, but uh, the the statement was that confidence is not built based on what you think. Confidence is built based on what you do, and it's the thought that building up the habit of doing the thing that you want to have confidence in. So in your case, heights, knowing that you'll be able to get up to the top of the structure because you've established a habit of scaling from the bottom to the top of it. Or if you're afraid of public speaking, maybe it is get it, building the habit of getting up in front of people and doing it. So the it's the action that builds the confidence, and it's not necessarily saying I'm confident, because that can just be, you know like a house of cards easily blown over. But when you have a track record that you can look back and see, oh, I've done this Spartan course before, I've scaled this height, I've jumped from this before, I've done this. That is like having social proof for yourself. And something that a couple of things that I talk about. Last season, I had a podcast episode where the topic was be your own best friend. And the idea behind that entire episode was, if the people that we were around, that we considered friends, if we talked to them like we talk to ourselves, we would be lonely individuals. Like, I can't think of anybody who would put up with me talking to them the way that I can sometimes talk to myself, right? And so it also seems like, as you have been working to begin to manage these fears, that even as they still come up, you talk about your self talk. So you're speaking to yourself kindly, you're being a friend to yourself, and that's also providing you with the gas and the fuel to do what needs to be done. What do you think?
100%. And I've had other races where I wasn't so kind with myself and I'm focusing more so on the negative things, like, oh, this hurts, or I'm not feeling well, or am I really going to make the time that I'm looking for, my time goal? And I realized that my results from that race somewhat reflects how I think of, talk to myself
Hmm.
and during that race, versus other races where I'm highly successful, right? I exceeded my goal. I felt great throughout the race. I finished it strong. I PR'd. And again, some of it's kind of linked to that self-talk. Now, I know there's a lot of other things, right? It's my
Right.
training, it's my fuel, it's my nutrition. So it's all got to come together, but it's the self-talk that's also a key component of it, of that, especially on race day.
Awesome. All right. So we have mindset, we have movement, motivation. Okay. So we know that a part of your motivation is that you just have it within yourself that you're just not going to quit. We know that in that first race, your motivation was also that you had a partner and you wanted to be accountable to that partner to hold up your end of the deal. But now, since you have some of these under your belt, what do you find your motivation? What is your motivation to keep going when things feel impossible or when things feel too hard? And this could be, running or when you get to that point, and I've heard runners talk about, I guess a lot of runners tend to have, like, as they're going, they have a glass ceiling that they feel like they have to break through. Then they get their second wind and they're able to keep going. I don't know if that's been your experience still or not, but when things are hard or they feel impossible or you want to quit, what is your motivation for continuing on?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, in that motivation pillar is setting a goal for yourself. And for a runner, it could be, I want to run a particular race in the future. And
Hmm.
if they want to really be strict about it, I want to run this particular race in this particular time. I try not to, I try not to teach that a lot, because even though I have a goal for every race, you're not always going to hit your goal, and you're not always going to get a PR, right? And that
Right.
could have the opposite effect. So even for myself, I try to set something that's reasonable, and I also try to set a stretch. And I actually had somebody on my show that has other goals unrelated to the physical race itself, which I think is incredible.
Hmm.
So for me, that's the motivation, is how setting something in the future for you to look forward to. So as an example, one of the things that I said that I would never be able to do, is run a marathon. And now that I've done, a lot of what I wanted to do with Spartan, and I feel like a stronger runner, I'm like, you know what? I think it's time to run a marathon. And not any marathon. I want to run one of the world majors. And if I
Mm.
do that, could I run all of the world majors by the time I hit a certain milestone, in my life? So for me, that's my motivation, is like this really big, hairy goal that now I can go after, that's exciting because it enables me to do things I've never done before, right? Which is
Right.
core part of what I've been doing. It enables me to travel the world, which I really love to do. And, through the pandemic, a lot of that stopped for 3 years. So I kind of got off track. And then through this community, I've met so many amazing people. And I feel like every type of race that I do, I meet more incredible people through this journey. So for me, like, that's a big part of my motivation, but for me personally, but it's also sharing that with others, which is also part of how my story started. So with
Hmm.
the community, saying, like, here's what I've done, here are my successes, here's my failures, here's what I've learned along the way, to help them along their journey. So
Yeah.
it's internal for me, but also external in helping others.
I love all of that. I love it. The setting goals piece and having clarity on what those goals are, for a coach. That is something that we continually remind ourselves and remind our clients about. You have to have something that you're shooting for, uh, because if not, then it's that much easier for you to quit because you don't have anything to latch on to. So I think you explained all of that really really well. I'm curious though, the guest that you talked about that had motivations or goals apart from just the running of the race or the physical portion. What were some of those other goals or motivations that they may have?
Yeah, so I touched a little bit on it in what I just said about running races around the world. They,
Ah, yeah.
they're running races in cities and countries that they've never traveled to before. So really, part of their goal is to go to that place
Okay.
and explore it and learn about it. And that's all encompassing in running that race, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about the race results; it's the experience kind of along the way. And one guest in particular shares the experience with his mom. which I think is just
Oh,
wonderful. So for many of the races, his mom comes and she also experiences wherever it is that they're going and sees her son, racing and performing and on stage, we'll say, right, in these really incredible world races. So that's some of the goals. And I think there's some other goals that he sets to, like in terms of how he feels in the race and
hmm.
how he paces himself. So those are some of the other types. But yeah, but if you just focus on, I want to hit this time in this race and that's it, you're somewhat limiting yourself to everything else that goes along, the experience of that race.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you can have goals where you zoom in and they're very micro focused, but you also need to have goals where you can zoom out and see where this will sit in the pantheon of other things. And so I like that. Uh, Goals really can expand our world, expand our existence. And so I'm I'm glad that you are sharing all of these experiences with your community, and I'm glad that you are sharing your experience with the Pep Squad as well, because everything that you have talked about in the runner sense, it's everything that we talk about on a episode by episode basis, and it still fits, man. Motivation is motivation. Mindset is mindset. Movement, generally, when you boil it down to its essence, movement is still movement, just in different arenas. So I would venture to say that uh, you are doing what we do on the podcast, man. You are cheering people on and you're coaching them up, and so we are just thank you for appearing on the podcast. So the way that I like to end every episode is I like, because we drop on Mondays. I like to give listeners something that they can carry throughout the rest of their week, and I call it just a pep talk. So, do you have some words of wisdom to get people started for the week? You think you can muster something up?
I'll try. I think I'll do the best I can. I'd say that if you're looking to make a change, right? If you started it or if you're already on that journey, believe that you can. I've seen and heard and listened to and shared so many stories of folks that started in one place and now through running, because that's what we talk about, now they're in a completely different place, physically, mentally, emotionally. And at first, maybe they didn't think they believed that they could, but they started. They took that first step. They learned along the way. They had their successes and their failures, and now they're really on their path to being where they want to be. So I would say if you're looking to make a change, believe that you can take that first or that next step and move through that and learn. And eventually you're going to get to where you want to be.
Love that. Love that. I hope y'all heard that. Believe that you can, because you can. And you didn't just hear that from me, you also heard that from your other coach, Coach Richard, as well. All right. So, Richard, why don't you tell us how we can get in contact with you if we want to learn more about running or whatever? How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Justin. Well, first off, I expect you to be the first person to get in touch with me as you're going to start running now, I heard. But yeah, so
I
first
said
off,
maybe.
oh, he said baby. All right. Well, we're gonna have some more coaching sessions there to get you to a yes. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Inspire to Run Podcast. That's probably where I'm the most active, and we're sharing, inspirational and very informative information around mindset, movement, and motivation. Right. So you can find us on Instagram and the podcast itself. So wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on YouTube. So wherever you get your podcasts, Inspire to Run Podcast.
Very cool. Very cool. Pep Squad, tap into the podcast. Tap into the Inspire to Run podcast. I've listened to more than a few episodes, and I can always pull something away that is completely relevant to where I am in my life right now. And also, if I am not mistaken, you're getting close to a podcast milestone. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I am rapidly approaching episode 100, which is just incredible to be here. And, it's not just about the 100, it's about episodes 1 through 99 that got me here, right? And all
Hmm.
the beautiful conversations, stories shared, and even the things I've learned, by doing all of this work. And hopefully those I've inspired to move along their own journey. So it's just been wonderful. And it's really an honor and a privilege for me to do what I do.
Very cool. Very cool. That speaks to your dedication and your consistency. So we here on the Pep Talk podcast, we applaud you. We applaud you, and we are wishing you 100 more, if that's what you wish, man. So thank you again for being on the podcast, Pep Squad. After this quick break, I'll be back to share some closing thoughts, and we will wrap up this episode. It's Coach Jay. Stay with us, jam to the music, and we will be right back. So I love where Richard was talking about his first Spartan race and how his first thoughts immediately after finishing were not, I'm done with this, but I can't wait to do this again. I can do better. And I think that's something that we all can pull away from this, whether you are a runner or not. Fail forward. If your first time is not the greatest, don't say that I'm never going to do this again, right? If it's something worth salvaging, if it's something that you can see yourself going back and doing, tell yourself, I can do better. I want to go back and do this. And as crazy as I think runners are, in a good way, runners, I love y'all. A part of me wishes that I could be a part of you. What I love about runners is the tenacity of their mindset. They are focused. They are laser focused. They have their music in their ears. They have their pace going. They have their water. They're tracking everything on their watches. There is a tenacity of focus and resolve that I love. If you've ever watched a cross-country meet, those kids get tripped up on routes. They're getting elbowed. It is an extreme contact sport. They fall, roll down hills, all this stuff, but they get up and they keep going. And I think, if we applied that mindset, the runner's mindset, to more areas in our lives, I think more of us would see our goals hit and would see our lives take on new shapes and new forms. And so if you don't take away anything else from this interview, from this episode, I really want you to take away this idea of adapting the runner's tenacity into your own everyday mindset, because I think that we can see some real results from that. All right, so again, we thank Richard for coming on to the podcast. Please go follow him on social media. Go support his podcast, Inspired to Run. It is definitely worth your time and your bandwidth. Also, I want to keep encouraging you to follow us on our socials at JB Speaks, on TikTok at PepTalk Podcast. We're not dancing. We are just bringing encouragement every day of the week as much as we can. Y'all don't want to see me dance, I promise. Also, please consider joining our 30-day challenge. This is day 8. As we're recording this, it is day 8. So please, in the show notes, just click the link to join our Facebook group and to hop onto the 30-day affirmation, the 30-day affirmation challenge. We're hearing good things about it. People are engaging, and it is really a fun time. And I want to get to know you in the Facebook group as well. And as always, y'all, I love you. I hope that you have a blessed week. And as we like to end these podcasts, keep it love, keep it light, and keep it Pepe. Y'all know who it is. It's the Pep Talk Podcast with your boy, Coach Jay, Life Coaching DFW. And we will see you for episode 8 of season 2 next week. Be blessed.